everyone. I think we're going to get started now. Welcome to the Forward in Energy Forum. We appreciate everyone for joining us today online. My name is Lulu Fragoso. I'm one of the Education and Outreach Assistants here at the Wisconsin Energy Institute at UW-Madison. Welcome to those of you who are returning forum attendees, and if this is your first time joining us for one of our events, we're glad that you're here. The Wisconsin Energy Institute's mission is to provide leadership on campus for multidisciplinary research, education, and outreach efforts that accelerate our transition to clean energy systems and solutions. The Forward in Energy Forum is a monthly series that brings together experts both on and off campus for cross-disciplinary dialogue, exploring important technical, social, political, and economic dimensions of a wide variety of clean energy innovations and topics. Today's forum is on consumer choices, and first we want to acknowledge that the land that the WEI occupies, as well as all of UW-Madison, is ancestral home of the Ho-Chunk people, who have called this land Dejop since time immemorial. We recognize and respect the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation and the other 11 Native nations within the boundaries of what we now call Wisconsin. Please take time to learn more about and support the efforts of tribal nations in Wisconsin and beyond, who are leading the transition toward clean energy and just energy systems. Next, we would like you to save a date for our next Forward Energy Forum titled Micro Madness Battle of the Biofuel Bugs, taking place on March 18th at 4:30 p.m. This forum is based around the hype of March Madness. This event is going to be really fun and interactive as we witness 4 scientists engage in some friendly competition to find out which microbe will reign supreme as the biofuel champion. And this forum will be in person here at WEI as well as online. So for some logistics, we'll have opening remarks from our panelists and some Q&A with our moderator before taking audience questions. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box on Zoom. Finally, if you need live captioning, you can toggle that feature by clicking on Show Captions button in Zoom. And if you have any other technical concerns, please let us know in the chat. To moderate today's panel, I am pleased to introduce Corey Singletary. Corey currently serves as the Director of Regulatory Affairs for the Citizens Utility Board here in Wisconsin. In addition to leading CUB's regulatory efforts, Corey is also an expert in utility cost allocation and rate design, having testified in over 80 cases before the Wisconsin Public Service Commission. Prior to joining CUB in 2017, Corey was employed by the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin as an energy policy advisor and utility rate analyst. During his time with the PSCW, his work focused on electric and natural gas utility rate design and cost of service, as well as a number of policy issues such as smart grid technology, innovative rate design, rate-based energy efficiency, conservation, and demand response programs, and distributed energy resources. Corey holds a Bachelor of Science degree in biology and a Bachelor of Arts degree in International Studies from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He also holds a master's degree in International Public Affairs and a graduate certificate in Energy Analysis and Policy from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We are very grateful to have him with us here today to set the stage for today's discussion. Thanks, Corey.
Thank you, and thanks to the Wisconsin Energy Institute for inviting myself as well as my esteemed panelists for this event today. As was mentioned, I'm currently with the Wisconsin Citizens Utility Board. For those who aren't familiar with it, just kind of in brief, the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin is the statewide consumer advocate for public utility customers in the state of Wisconsin. We were created by the Wisconsin legislature in 1979 and have been advocating on behalf of Wisconsin's public utility customers since then. We're kind of an odd beast. If we were in another state, my job or our office, the function of our organization would actually be handled by a state agency, usually within an attorney general's office. But we deal with pretty much anything dealing with utility regulation before the state utility regulator. And, in thinking about, the topic of today's event, the title kind of captures everything for me in terms of, empowering customers, navigating the switch to clean energy technologies. As the statewide consumer advocate for Wisconsin, we're often presented with questions about clean energy technologies that are being adopted by utility customers. As the consumer advocate, we typically deal with these questions as they relate to specific utility products or programs, rates, regulations. But underlying all of these issues and all of the complicated regulatory processes we go through, you know, is the broader question of what are the consumers doing? What technologies are of interest to customers? Not just homeowners, but potentially even things like EVs and whatnot. What technologies are people investing in? And perhaps more challenging questions like what technologies maybe should customers be considering, but perhaps they aren't aware of them or the benefits they can bring, or maybe just don't really kind of understand, what's the best way to approach sort of clean energy tech. For some, clean energy technology might be perceived still as being really kind of just an early adopter or just for diehards, but really much of what's available and much of what we're probably going to talk about today is really has achieved, mass market level of development and availability, and arguably should be considered alongside more traditional technology options on more conventional comparison terms like cost and convenience. Effect on quality of life in addition to environmental or sustainability benefits. Joining me today, I have a wonderful panel. In order today, we'll be starting with Nancy Wong, who's the Coles Chair in Retail Innovation, the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and the Professor of Consumer Science at UW-Madison. I hope my panelists forgive me. I'm not going to go through their detailed bio. Folks can look those up on the program website so we can have more time for discussion today. In addition to Nancy, we also have Kathy Kuntz, Director of the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change. Kevin Kane, Chief Economist and Co-founder of Green Homeowners United, who handles installation and works directly with customers on the ground in terms of clean energy technology. So his perspectives will be really interesting. And Julie Sinistori, Senior Vice President for WSP. And so we'll start with about 5 to 7 minutes of introductory remarks by each of our panelists, and then we'll jump into hopefully a lively discussion. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Nancy, and Nancy can take us away.
Thank you, Corey, for that kind introduction. I am looking forward to actually, hopefully, try to contextualize and perhaps position some of the issues that we are likely to talk about today in a broader sort of like conceptual framework that allows us to think about these questions in specific buckets, so to speak. Can everyone see the slides? Is Lulu going to? I'm just curious.
Yes, we can see the slide.
Oh, you can? Okay. Yeah, I don't see the slide, so I wasn't sure whether, she has the slide. So forward the slide to, I think, the two choices. Let me just move this down. So I think a lot of the times when we talk about consumer choices, it's really kind of embedded into a bigger framework of the environment and the system. There are these systemic, structural processes, and which many of you seem to be familiar with in terms of the policy. And a lot of the times, policies can serve to incentivize or discourage or confuse any number of things in terms of how we individuals as consumers are able to act on these choices, even though we may want to. So I think it becomes, as you said, a potentially confusing landscape. And the question then becomes, how do we actually translate these policies into, I think, numbers or into information that is digestible to the consumers that allows them to make the kind of choices that they would like to make. So I think that is the bigger picture of that. And at the level of the individuals, Again, some of the choices that are available to us are very much dictated by what is available within the system as well, depending on whether you own your own home or whether you live in a rental unit, whether you live in the center of town where you have access to, mass transportation as opposed to having to, drive or, take the bus or something along those lines. So I think some of the choice in a lot of individual choices can be constrained by the environment or the system under which that we live under. And as I was thinking about some of the issues that you have raised, Corey, I was also thinking about the middleman, the role of the middleman that translates some of these policy incentives into individual adoption. I'm thinking about, I guess, we can move to the next slide on the time frame of these choices, because we can further think about them in terms of some of the adoption of, I think, smart tech, energy tech especially, in the sense that we may have policies that serves to try to encourage and to motivate consumers to actually adopt things like solar panels, heat pumps, and various other kind of incentives. And if you are a homeowner and you are in a position to start thinking about making those decisions, you need to find out what is available out there. And sometimes I think the implementation of these choices are not that simple and easy, because they are kind of dictated by the middleman. Who are going to be the installers? Where are you going to find reputable ones? How are you going to actually enact on that? So those are actually three potential, I think, areas that is often, I think, impeding or making this particular choice or process really difficult. And I'm sure many of the panelists would be able to share their knowledge and information with you on that. And I think the final choice, I think, or buckets, slide forward, please. Between the time frame and all that, I'm thinking about, again, some of these different buckets, whether it's policy, the middleman, and the individual consumers, are also actually constrained and differ by the time frame of these choices. One could be a very discrete and concrete kind of, action and behavior that can be enacted at that point in time if all the elements are there, and an individual can make the trade-off to think about, okay, I would like to install solar panel now. I'm ready to install the heat pump, and here are the trade-offs and the considerations that I need to think about. So those are much more discrete decisions. And until we can actually translate policies and the technology into what it means to the consumers at that concrete level, it's very hard for them to make those choices, especially when some of these choices are not insignificant from a cost standpoint. So that kind of communication and education is important. And finally, I think for individual behaviors, a lot of the times, because they are continuous, something that we encounter on a daily basis is not going to be top of mind for us in terms of, every time when I actually pick up, a fruit, for example, do I think about what are the environmental implications of this fruit that I'm picking up? We don't, because we just pick them based on what looks good to us, what we can afford, and various other things. So a lot of the times, even though individual consumers want to do good, it may not be so easy for them to actually think about a lot of those implications of their choices, whether it is food and whether it is the clothing that they choose to wear, and many of those, everyday sort of choices. So I guess, so these are the kind of things that I would like you to consider as you think about the time frame of these decisions, whether it is concrete and abstract, or whether it is continuous or one time. So with that, I would, pass it to my next, I think, esteemed panelist.
Thank you, Nancy. Next, we'll have Kathy go.
Terrific.
Yes.
Thanks, Corey. So as Corey said, I direct the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change, and there's sort of two things to know about what we do at the Office of Energy and Climate Change. First, we have very ambitious goals. We have a goal to cut countywide emissions in half by 2030, and that's even though Dane County is the fastest growing county in Wisconsin, we're saying an absolute cut in emissions from 2017 to 2030 of 50%. The other thing to know about our work is that under Wisconsin's constitution, counties have relatively little authority. So I have really big goals, but I cannot mandate achievement of those goals. I cannot tell people to make the kinds of choices we're talking about today. So I am really obsessed, some might say, with this challenge of how do we get people as individuals, as businesses, as whole communities to move to action. This is a really important thing. And, you know, the first way I come at this is as someone who spent decades in energy efficiency and thinks about the data. Next slide. One of my favorite data tools is this Cool Climate Network. They have a household carbon calculator where they've pulled data from any number of national sources. You can put in Madison, Wisconsin, like I did, and they give you a typical household profile, and then you can customize that. So I customized some of this to reflect my house, and you can see that it's showing you that this household that I constructed here has like slightly less than half the emissions of a typical home in my zip code. So there's a way to do this, my point being, that is data driven, where you look at all the pieces. You look at transportation and your housing and your food and the goods you buy and the services you pay for, and you can customize a ton of the information here. And, you know, looking at this, it's really clear that for this household I constructed, the really big things to go after next are air travel and natural gas usage in the home. Maybe to look at how many streaming services they have. There's an awful lot of services over there. But this is like thinking about the very rational way we would go at this. And, you know, having been at a number of these awesome Energy Institute talks, there's a fair number of people on this call who this is how they want to approach this. What I want to note, though, is most of us live in households with other people who are less excited about graphs about our lives. And so part of what we have to figure out here is how you make choices that work for whole households. And, you know, when we think about regular people, next slide, this is my favorite slide of regular people in all the universe, because these are people who know that exercise is good for them, and that's why they're taking the escalator to the gym. And this makes, you know, a couple of the points Nancy was making about things that are habitual and what the barriers are. And when we're thinking about choices, it's really important to not get too caught in I'm going to spend years analyzing data to find the one best thing to do. I mean, okay, I'm going to keep pounding okay, but at some point it's good to just do things because you could search forever for the one best thing. Next slide. When I think about this and thinking about motivating humans to action, so I've done a fair amount of work where I actually worked with game developers, and game developers teach you that you should hook people so they keep coming back. And I think this is a concept we need to think about in this space, that we want people to make choices that spur them to make other choices, because there isn't one thing they should do. There's a bunch of things they should do. So how do you make those first choices they make sticky so they come back and do other choices? And I think some of the ways you do that, you make it pleasant. Okay, the first thing, if you're trying to persuade your household to take things on, you might want to first take on a thing that's going to be actually fun. One of my colleagues has started commuting to the office on an e-scooter. like, man, she is having fun on that e-scooter kind of thing. There is something really sticky there in, wow, what else can we do at our house? Because this was a pretty fun thing. You also want to really leverage how much we can see that people around us are making choices too, because that's really reinforcing. And a thing our office obsesses about is, how do we make it easier for people to do stuff? How do we, we've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years looking at all of the federal tax credits and rebates for energy efficient and renewable energy choices. And how do we make it easier for people to make sense of that? Because if it's really hard, people aren't going to do it. Next slide. The thing I will close with is that I think at the end of the day, it's less about the one right thing than the series of right things. And to build on Nancy's point, there's both the little habits that add up, the choices you're making about how you move around the community, how warm your home is when you're not there, all of that matters. But you also need to plan for the big stuff. When your water heater goes out is a terrible time to start learning about water heater technology. You should proactively be planning about some of those things. The other really important choice for us all to make is that we talk about climate change in casual conversations with friends, and I talk to grocery store clerks about climate change if there's an opening to do so, and not in a lectury way, but more in a, yeah, this is probably one of the ways climate change affects us, when she mentions that it's unusually hot or something. So, it's really just a matter of lots of things play into how we make choices here. And of course, all of us can do more. There's always something else we could be doing. So with that, I will turn it back to Corey.
All right. Thanks, Kathy. There's a lot of stuff there. I think we might jump into to kind of kick us off on our discussion. But before we get to that, just hold on, we have a little bit more to go. And hand it off to Kevin to kind of give his perspective from on the ground, essentially.
Thank you, Corey, and thanks everyone for being here. Kathy, that was excellent. I cannot agree more. And also, I can't help but notice that the houses, of course, are a big part of it. My name is Kevin Kane. I'm the chief economist at a group called Green Homeowners United. We are the only residential energy efficiency unionized woman-owned firm in the whole state of Wisconsin doing this kind of work to directly upgrade homes. And so as both a contractor and as an economist, I speak with clients every day on what improvements make sense, what the cost benefits are, and what appears to get people motivated to act. And I'm a numbers guy at heart, but I'm also disappointed sometimes at how numbers don't often motivate action on their own. In general, what we've found is that people often seem to be most interested when it comes to home improvements on the things that they can see every day: windows, doors, followed by the big flashy items like solar, heat pumps, etc. And often or otherwise they're often motivated by addressing a problem area in their home, such as a cold room or a high energy bill, and are thus open to solutions. The challenge is that years of advertising have encouraged people to think of this as a large purchase. And to be fair, windows and solar, they can be. But a large purchase that is cost effective. But truthfully, windows, doors, etc., they rarely are cost effective in that respect, if looked solely at the return on investment from energy bills. In fact, at today's gas and electric rates, we really shouldn't be looking at simple payback calculations, as most projects don't have a simple 5-year payback, especially since, one, that doesn't factor in other financial benefits, such as the resale value of your home or avoiding the negative consequences to your home of fixing a possible health and safety benefit or health safety issue. And that, two, most people do not make these sort of cost benefit, quote unquote, rational decisions. Their motivation is generally more specialized than that. I have had people decline projects with a 2-year payback, and I have seen people enthusiastically sign up for projects that would never pay for themselves. What seems to work in educating people about all of this is to listen to them about what they care about and to help them figure out what motivates them. You will never convince someone who was worried about the lead paint on their original windows that instead air sealing and insulating their attic is a better course of action. But if they're considering windows thinking that it will save them 20% energy savings, which by the way it will not, they can perhaps be open to guidance that other areas matter more. So this is more challenging, but it's also a great opportunity because of the new Inflation Reduction Act's rebate program, known as the Homes Rebate, which requires a 20% energy saving calculation to unlock thousands of dollars in incentives for their home. Almost nobody who calls me knows what will save 20% of their energy bill. We get asked all the time about refrigerators, windows, doors, air conditioners. Most of these, by the way, are less than 2% savings. So energy assessors like us can help guide people through accessing these funds and figure out what maybe makes the most sense. But it can help if those of us who care about helping people access these funds ahead of time kind of prepare folks to what to expect. So I'm going to give you 3 things that you can do to prepare people for how to be thinking about their home in order to access these new Inflation Reduction Act funds. 1, air source heat pumps are cool and definitely help cut energy use. But if you are on natural gas today in Wisconsin, your energy bills will generally go up, not down. That does not mean you shouldn't do it. I have one myself, but don't expect it to save thousands. Also, that decision or that situation, take heart. If you're worried that people won't take up on heat pumps because their bills will go up, I have positioned 2 equal sized projects, one mostly insulation, one mostly heat pump, and people have gravitated to the heat pump, even though the heat pump wouldn't have paid for itself. 2, for many homes, the unfinished basements are often a larger source of energy loss than the above ground walls and the attic combined. Why? Well, because adding some insulation where none exists has a much larger impact than adding more where some already exists. People can kind of realize, oh, that's right, the basement is connected to my home or this crawl space or this part of my house that sticks out. And so kind of getting people to think through, all right, prioritizing the area that could benefit the most is more important than one particular area. The house is all connected. And then 3, the order matters. Air sealing and insulating first, then install heat pumps, then look at solar panels. You can make sure that you don't have too big of a heat pump or too small of a solar system. And please take it from someone who installed solar first and then added a heat pump, and now I might need more panels because I did it in the wrong order. So I'll end with a little bit of a longer term action that I think people could be doing and kind of thinking through the choices and decisions about this. And I think that not many people do, and it's kind of a disappointment, or it's kind of a missed opportunity. Most people are not able to afford the large projects that their house could benefit from, the collection of electrifying, energy efficiency, renewables all at the same time. Most people can't afford those large projects. And many times they tell themselves that they'll just save up and every few years get something new. Well, not only is that missing out on the carbon emissions that we could cut now, but a lot of times it is actually more cost effective for people to do large multi-step energy projects through fair financing programs that already exist. WIDA, for example, has a program right now where people can get a below market rate 3% loan for $50,000 that can go to insulation, HVAC, and windows. You don't really find those terms anywhere else. The city of Milwaukee, too, has a specialized energy loan program that allows people to do things without putting a lien on their home. Plus, the new Inflation Reduction Act rebates are often twice as much, thousands of dollars, for homes doing bigger jobs. And considering multiple studies showing home buyers' willingness to pay more for your home with better insulation, better windows, better HVAC, you don't need to be living in a home for 15 plus years for it to be quote unquote worth it. And so the decisions around all of this are complex and multifaceted, but a lot of times we're helping to get people to think through how one decision connects to others and how maybe doing more at one time can come at the problem from multiple angles.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. And then just to round us out, I'll hand it off to Julie.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I echo everything all the previous speakers said, and to build on some of it, you know, what Nancy said, does everyone consider the impacts of the fruit when they're going to buy it at the supermarket? No. But given my background, I do life cycle assessment. I've been doing life cycle assessment for 18 years. It's a systematic scientific methodology for calculating the embodied environmental impacts of goods and services from raw materials through transportation, use phase, and disposal end of life. So given that that's my background, yes, I do. I do pick up that piece of fruit and think, refrigerated thing from Peru. Nope, I'm not going to get that out of season fruit. I'm going to go for something in season because I know it will have lower environmental impacts. And I love that Kathy brought up those types of calculators that you can find online. One of my favorite nerdy little pastimes is finding those calculators and going through and filling them out as I am. Now, I'll give the qualifier. While I am a Badger, a UW alum, it's where I learned to do life cycle assessment in my master's and PhD at UW-Madison. I no longer live in Wisconsin. I live in Portland, Oregon. And so I fill them out as I am today in Portland, Oregon. And disclaimer, even though I spent 6 years in America's Dairyland, I am vegan. I've been vegan for 25 years. And I love filling out those calculators as I am and seeing what the impacts are. And then going back and changing only one thing, which is what I eat, from vegan to just sort of standard American diet. And it's amazing to see how much more impact there is from just that one change. And I'm not going to harp on it, and I'm not telling everyone on this call to just go vegan, but it is something to consider what we can do in our daily choices around food and simple household goods, whether that's choosing meatless Mondays or signing up for a veg pledge, or just trying to make some more swaps to eat a little lower on the food web as we possibly can energetically. So I also echo what others have said about your homes. I am a somewhat, well, not that recent homeowner anymore, but having purchased my first home and the home that I live in that is 100 years old this year, I sympathize with people who are dealing with existing housing stock, trying to improve the overall sustainability of that building while also balancing that with things like worrying about lead or asbestos when you're trying to take out your windows or put in or change your siding or even put in insulation, and you know you're going to disturb some existing conditions that are going to need some sort of mitigation or lead to some sort of household disturbance. But I will say, and I mentioned this when we had a little pre-call, I almost feel like it'd be more appropriate to have my husband on this call. But oh well, you got me. But he works for a general contractor. He's been in contracting for 25 years, and he is a sustainability specialist. And he always harps on passive first before you go active. So thinking about things like windows and insulation, doing the blower test to see where the leaks are in your house and doing what you can to plug those up before you go to the active systems like installing solar panels or solar water heating. And as others have said, you know, heat pumps might not pencil out, and you certainly don't want to think about that once your existing furnace or other system is already kaput and you're in need of it immediately. But I'll agree that in life, the low-hanging fruit and the things that are easy to change on a daily basis, and I really advocate trying to incorporate those things slowly, not all at once, not trying to change your whole life all at once, whether it's what you're eating or what you're buying or how your home is powered. So for example, in our own lives, we moved into this house and the previous owners had already just put in a brand new furnace, new hot water heater. So while we would have loved to look into heat pumps, which do pencil out pretty well in the Pacific Northwest because it doesn't get as cold as it does in Wisconsin, that's not really on the agenda for now because that system is fairly new. So instead, what we're looking at is our stove is getting a bit dated and it's gas, and we'd love to update it with an electric, particularly a convection system. Of course, that would mean replacing all our pots and pans. So, but you know, like one thing at a time, slowly as we go along. And I always advocate looking into your food choices, seeing what kinds of sustainable options are available right there in your community, certainly leveraging things like farmers markets and community supported agriculture, local farmers, and that sort of thing. But every time something does come along, we do with the house, something needs to be updated. We do look at it as an opportunity to make more sustainable choices. So for example, while the previous sellers had just updated the furnace, the front stairs were falling apart, completely just tattered mess. And so we decided to do our research and focus our energy on making those as sustainable as possible. So when we redid the stairs, we sourced FSC and something called Restoration Juniper for our stringers and banister. We used red list free stain for that wood, and then for the actual treads, we use TimberTech, which is a lumber-like material that's actually made from recycled plastic and is itself recyclable, to try to follow the rule of thumb of having, you know, the most sustainable options for each piece of that project that we had to do. And another thing that we like to think about, if anyone's ever heard of the International Living Futures Center, or ILFI, International Living Future Institute, rather, ILFI, they have a system for their living buildings, a petal system. There's 7 different petals, and it's all about being carbon neutral, energy neutral, or even generating more energy or more water. But one of their petals I think is really interesting is beauty, because something that is aesthetically pleasing is more likely to be preserved into the future than it is to be torn down and redone. So we try to make our stairs as aesthetically pleasing as possible, so that someday, if we're not living in this house, whoever does take on the house next isn't just going to rip out everything that we did just to put in something that they find more attractive, right? So thinking about not just how to make the thing durable and sustainable, but also beautiful, so that people want to keep it and keep it in use. Because what life cycle assessment tells us is that the most sustainable thing usually is the thing you already have, right? It's usually more sustainable to keep the car that you already have, keep it running properly and working efficiently, than it is to go out and get a brand new car, or sometimes even a used car. Again, from a whole life cycle systems perspective, with the caveat of, you know, it's not always the case. And then the other thing we worked on in the first few years in the house, because yes, it does need new windows. I can see that they're single pane and they're super old. They might even be original, because they do the wavy thing that this, you know, the highly viscous fluid that glass does after a long time. It's very disruptive to rip all the windows out of your house. So we focused in our first few years here actually on things we could do with the landscape, because the previous owners really hadn't done much with it at all. So we got rid of a lot of grass, replaced with rain gardens, pollinators with native pollinating plants, native landscaping. We put in permeable pavers to help with water management around the house, because it's very, very rainy here in Portland, Oregon. And any other plants that we planted, they either had to be native or they had to be food for us or food for the native species. And so that also adds to the beauty and the curb appeal of the house. I can't tell you how many times I've been out front, you know, weeding something or just doing a little something, and somebody walks by and says, "I just love what you've done with the front of your house." And so it adds to value, it adds to curb appeal, it adds to beauty, but it's also adding to the overall sustainability. And yeah, this is a tiny little plot of land that we have the ability to affect, but we take it very seriously in what we do, and we use the information that we have from what we do for a living to inform our choices about everything that we do to affect our landscape.
All right. Thanks, Julie. I did see a question roll into the chat, and we'll get to participant questions in just a little bit. So if you do have questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom and submit those, and we'll get to those, and we will remember to circle back to that one that is in the chat. But you know, thinking about a kind of consistent theme through what all of you have been talking about, at least from where I sit, and again, I'm kind of approaching this from a particular lens as well, which is typically farther down the road or in sort of a middle step of the process of how can we enable choices by consumers, is I'm going to steal Kathy's terms. I think it's like motivating consumers to action. And thinking about, you know, essentially the first steps, right? If the idea is either someone who's here today participating or watching today's event, or is interested in going out into the community or making it the profession of how to motivate folks or helping folks make these technology changes for clean energy technology. You know, what do you think is like the most generalized best first step? You know, Kathy showed a nice graph in terms of breaking down, you know, looking at what an individual's energy usage looks like, and maybe where those big areas that you could target might be. Is it getting like a home energy assessment or putting in like a sense monitor, or should we be more just targeting stuff that is for 95% of folks, generally speaking, always a common sense step, and just trying to get folks to take that first step, to someone's point earlier, of at least starting down the pathway. So maybe you start building that thought process of, okay, I've already, you know, maybe the super low hanging fruit of, obviously, I've already replaced all the lights in my home with LEDs. And so they're already thinking, well, what's the next logical thing I could do? Is it information gathering to like ground people to help them better pick, or is it more about just sort of motivating people to just get going? And I'm just going to open that up to all four of you if someone wants to jump in. Nancy?
Yeah, sorry. I was actually just thinking about it as I was listening to both Kathy and Kevin about, you know, all these different incentives and policies that, you know, I don't know. I'm completely ignorant in terms of the implementation of this. I wonder if they are decision guides. Decision guides that is kind of a step-by-step thing that somebody who is completely novice can think through this particular. It's like, have you considered this? Are you thinking about this? Are you faced with this? If you're trying to make a decision about heat pump, what will be the first consideration? You know, I was motivated by what Kevin said. You know, if you're going to do these things, there is a logical flow that you should think about, the kind of decision steps. Maybe one way of helping consumers to make choices like this is to actually just give, not so much as giving them the information, because I find that information is not really all that motivating or helpful if you don't need that information. So just communication for communication's sake doesn't help the consumers. I think when the consumers are ready for that information is when they need to make a choice, as what Julie was saying. Oh, you know, my heat pump just went up. Oh, sorry, my furnace just went up. What should I do now? So if we have something on the ready for them that they could act on at that decision point, is when you're going to be the most effective. So that's kind of something that I'm throwing out there.
So there is, and I will find the link. It will take me a little bit though. Maybe we'll send it out afterwards, Scott. The like Focus on Energy does have a buyer's guide to heat pumps that I think helps people walk through some of that. I think the other piece of this though, so Nancy's right. There's sort of a ton of information. Doesn't matter if someone doesn't think that this applies to them. There was research, gosh, this is like probably close to 20 years old now, a national survey asking American households if they thought their household was more energy efficient or less energy efficient than their neighbors. And it turns out 90% of us think we're more efficient than our neighbors. So there's like this problem, which clearly is not the case. Let's just be clear. We have an economist here. He would tell us that 90% of us cannot actually be more efficient. Part of this, I think, is helping people understand that there are better things than what they have. So when I do talks, I very often to consumer groups, I have a slide of, you might need an energy audit if you have big icicles hanging from your roof all winter, if you have parts of your house you don't use in the high summer or the cold winter because they're uninhabitable. And always there are people in the audience who partway through that list poke their partner and go, see, we don't have to, but they have to know that if you've lived in Wisconsin your whole life in old leaky homes, you don't know that homes can be better than that. You've never seen the alternative. And so part of this is how do we actually give someone that experience that I mean, when I listen to Kevin, it's all so real, but part of what the problem is your consumers don't know until afterwards when they go, wow, it's so much more comfortable. Who knew that was what would happen?
I'll be a broken record and I'll just encourage people, if you haven't already gotten an energy assessment, it's oftentimes a great thing to do. Just not just because it helps unlock incentives, but just the number of times where I show something in someone's house that they didn't even know was there. I even did this on my own house a little while back. I was filming a video in my own home for educational purposes. I have insulated half my basement and I haven't gotten around to the other half yet because Kyler's kids' shoes are never done either. But we were doing a thermal camera and we noticed it was 0 degrees outside, that the insulated part of my basement was 60. And then the uninsulated rim joist that a previous company had come but missed a part of it was 19 degrees in my own basement. And I'm like, okay, this is clearly a big part. And I thought I knew this stuff, right? And so being able to kind of learn some of these things about your house makes it kind of impossible to unlearn it. And so then you kind of have this itch that makes you want to fix it on some level. And a lot of the times you can find that you can fix a lot of these things yourself once they're shown to you. And especially because in Wisconsin, Focus on Energy is providing no cost energy assessment for people below certain income levels. There are federal tax credits to help offset the cost of energy assessments for those that are above a certain income level. But I can give you a couple ways right now. It's a little nicer today, but once it gets a little colder again, assuming it is, assume we're in fake spring, you go into your basement, put your hand on the wall. If it's quite cold, there's an indication. Go up to your attic hatch if you have one. Open the hatch. Do you feel insulation behind it, or is it just a piece of wood? If you can go up, poke your head up in the attic, and if you can see those vertical joists with insulation between it but not over it, you probably don't have enough. Trust your instincts on this. If a room feels too cold or too drafty, there's probably something to that. And so we can use that sort of gut feeling that people have when they learn this information to be like, you're right, there is something here. And I think my favorite thing I hear from someone is not when they say you're right, but when they say that's right, this is happening in our house, right? And so it's quite entertaining, but also informative at the same time to help people see things that they hadn't noticed before.
Nancy, so you wanted to jump in?
I wanted to ask, how much does it cost to do an energy assessment? Because is it possible to just do this for free for anybody who wants it, or to promote free energy assessments? Because I think, if we know that energy assessments gives you a good conversion rate in terms of people starting to think about all the tech, I think energy tech adoption, I think it's worth it to consider just giving out free assessment to incentivize people to take actions is one possibility. And I'm also looking at the electric heat pump customer buying an operational guide. This doesn't work. It is just way too complicated and loaded with too much information. What I was asking for is something really, really simple, like the kind of questions that Kevin, you just illustrated, things that consumers can just do on their own to think about things that would ask them to think further. But if I were to be thinking about it, if I look at this massive amount of information, I would just sort of break down and not pursue it further.
So right now, energy assessments we actually did a little study about this a couple of years ago. By our calculations, about 623,000 Wisconsin homeowners are within the income qualification where their energy assessment will be no cost. And so that's hundreds of thousands of residents who suddenly might be able to do this. If we were able to get even a fraction of them to do work in their home, I mean, that would have a pretty sizable impact. Again, some of it's work they can do, some of it's work that would be unlocked through this. For others, the energy assessment might be somewhere, especially after the federal tax credits included, between $400 and $800, depending on how much that they're aiming to do. And many companies, ourselves included, can oftentimes comp the price of the job based on that. So you're only paying if you don't act on it. And so there's many ways that people can do it. You don't always even need an energy assessment. Sometimes you can kind of learn these sort of things about your house through conversations. I would definitely encourage doing so before getting a heat pump, though, so that you know how big of a heat pump to get. We'll also do something called a manual J calculation, a heat load calculation, so that you don't get too big of a heat pump. Because I agree, heat pumps are kind of the wave of the future in many ways. But I wouldn't put one in a very old leaky house.
Cool. I do want to jump to the couple of audience questions that we have, and if we run out of those, then I've got a few more. So the first one that came in, I guess this is everyone's best. If folks know for sure, then definitely. Otherwise, it might be a little bit of prognostication. There was a question from Gloria in the chat asking, is the Trump administration going to be able to claw back funds from Wisconsin for the homes funding, homes grants?
I don't know if Kathy knows more than I do on this, but the short answer is they shouldn't be able to. But I'm free to say things maybe others can. We don't fully know in that sense. As it stands right now, Wisconsin did not get a large chunk of money that is just sitting in a bank account somewhere. It is something that they have to seek disbursement of. That being said, we are under contract. These funds have been awarded. So in a normal world, no. But in the world that we live in, where a couple weeks ago, all the states suddenly lost access to Medicaid expenditures the other week. It's a little harder to say. That being said, we are doing our darndest to get as many people into the airplane before it takes off as we can. I am not worried about this. We are jumping in with both feet to get as many people enrolled as possible until the funds run out, and then there's the next chance to advocate for more. But that being said, I wouldn't wait 3 years, because it's quite possible these funds will be gone even if nothing did change. And so we encourage people to take action, but there's always a strong case to make to upgrade your home, whether or not there are federal rebates or tax credits or whatever around. There is plenty of good research out there that people want to buy energy efficient homes. And there is a good return on it for comfort, for resale value, for energy savings, or even just saying you got the coolest house on the block.
Anyone else have any insights on this one?
So-
What Kevin mentioned lines up with my understanding, was that Wisconsin was one of the very first states in the country, if not actually the first state, to be awarded and under contract for the homes funding. So we are the train is farther down the track, so to stop it is a little harder, but to Kevin's point, it may not be legally impossible. Kathy?
Yeah, I really think the only jeopardy for these funds would be is if in the budget reconciliation that Congress is starting now, if they went back and canceled some of these programs and said states could only, spend the money they implemented in 2025 or something, I think. And the same thing is true about the tax credits. Right now, we have a bunch of clean energy tax credits in place. Kevin talked about the homes program, the home energy rebates available through Focus on Energy there are higher rebates for lower income households. And in some cases, households with incomes over 150% of the county median income won't qualify for some of the electrification incentives, but everyone qualifies for the tax credit. So you can think of these two pieces as complementary. If you aren't going to get funding on the rebates, you will get tax credits. Both of them are in place today, and there's a budget bill looking for money to pay for other tax credits. And so I am very confident that 2025 can be a robust year, and we will know in the next couple of months the status of things for 2026, because that budget bill will have been finalized.
Okay.
I'll just give one other example of this. In a different life, I was helping one of the health insurance cooperative companies that were founded under the Affordable Care Act, another large transformative law that changed an industry that a previous administration did not like and tried to defund. And they did actually attempt to take away, at the time, what were called premium tax credits away from these private companies that were under contract to give. And that particular health insurance cooperative won a lawsuit about it, and the administration had to pay with damages. So in some levels, we've been here before, but I'm really hoping it's not a repeat. I don't want to have to go to court.
All right. A question from Robert that was submitted. Do you have any comments on the Focus on Energy program? Do you have any ideas to make it better? And I'm going to say ideas to make it better with respect to supporting adoption of clean energy technologies.
I want to know Kathy's answer.
Well, I think probably the biggest way to make it better would be to expand the funding for Focus on Energy. So Focus on Energy has ended up with very flat funding for the last 15 years. And it means that over time, they have less and less ability to help people make good choices because they have a shrinking, what is essentially a shrinking pot of money. And so they tend to offer incentives kind of to the point Nancy was making without providing maybe all of the hand holding that folks need to make good choices with those incentives. And so that requires more funding. You know, the Focus on Energy program is funded by all of us through our electric and natural gas rates at a very small percentage that Corey could probably off the top of his head tell us.
1.2% of utility revenues.
1.2% of utility revenues. So if that were 2% of utility revenues, that would expand things dramatically.
And I'll maybe along those lines, in terms of the Focus on Energy program, one thing I've heard from some folks is even with the funding that's there, right, there's potentially an equity question looking at the state in terms of access to that, in that whether it's the reach of Focus and how successful they are, or the utilities in partnership with Focus on Energy, it is not the case that the amount of dollars that folks who are, say, MG&E customers or We Energy's customers, that they pay into Focus is the same amount of dollars that come back into that utility service territory. And some utilities are better at connecting their customers with Focus than others. And so even with the funding we have, there may be an opportunity to make certain that we're more equitably distributing that.
Corey, can I just add to that the recent research at Focus also shows that everywhere in the state, renters, people of color, people whose first language is in English are also underserved by the program. You know, it does matter where you are, but it also tremendously matters your situation, kind of to the which things can you control in this.
Yeah. That's a very important point. And for folks who are curious about that, the commission had directed the contractor that's in charge of the Focus on Energy program to look into developing programs specifically targeting underserved populations. I'll call it that broadly, particularly low-income customers, but underserved populations throughout the state with the Focus on Energy program. So that one potentially maybe can bring some more money to the table for some folks. A question from Mr. Hubbock. That's a name I haven't heard in a while. Are induction ranges more efficient than conventional electric? If so, is the difference enough to justify replacing a conventional electric range that still works? I will maybe expand this question to maybe include a comparison, maybe in terms of total energy usage or utility bills, with induction ranges compared to unlike a natural gas range.
Julie, have you done this analysis? I feel like you are our person to have done this analysis.
I haven't done that specific one. No, I would guess it's probably gonna depend. That's the famous LPA answer. It depends on your energy source versus your natural gas source and what environmental impact you're trying to optimize for. But at least for our house, we have concluded that, yeah, the induction range would be a more sustainable option than the current gas one that we have. Another consideration for that is also indoor air quality and the effect of burning natural gas in your house, which we've been looking into as not the greatest thing. So in the interim, until we do fully replace the stove, we've gotten, for example, like an electric tea kettle. We're not a coffee household, we're a tea household. And so that cuts down, I mean, the primary thing that I heat up every single day is hot water for tea. So I think it's important to remember that there's multiple considerations when you're making these choices.
Can I just add one thing to this? And I put a note about this in the chat when Julie was talking before about her gas stove versus an induction stove. So we recently replaced an electric range with an induction range. And the huge difference is how much less hot our kitchen is when I'm cooking. Because even the and the sort of the range of this, so if you cook with a gas stove, it's something like 80% of the heat generated at the burner goes into the room versus the kettle. Like it's very high. And then on the induction end, it's more like 30% goes into the room versus the kettle. So in my kitchen, which is relatively small, there was a huge impact. Like I realized that I used to think cooking in the summer was like a punishment I'd been given. And like all of a sudden, like the kitchen is really a pretty pleasant place. And I am willing to like, so there's, and this speaks to the, you know, we can do the math, but there's more than the math to think about in these things. What's the thing that sells someone?
All right. I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat right now. Nope, there we go. One just literally popped in. So the question is, how can we convince developers and home builders to incorporate sustainability instead of mass producing cookie cutter houses that have gas stoves, less than optimal appliance efficiency ratings, and overpriced leaky houses?
Okay, well,
I mean, my immediate answer is consumer demand. There has to be demand.
and I'll preface this with I'm not a home builder, so I don't work in that area as much. I will say that like a lot of the code experts who try to come up with the latest versions of the IECC, I believe it's every 2-3 years they come up with a new version, and that is standards that aim to improve our building code. Now your state has to accept that code improvement, and our municipalities aren't given them opportunity anymore to set them themselves. And so I believe Wisconsin is trapped in 2012's version, if I remember correctly. Now, to be fair, that is leaps and bounds better than most houses. I live in West Dallas. I checked with my city a while back. I think they built one house a year. And so I personally am not believing that we can build our way out of this. But that code, as old as it is, also requires insulated basements, air-sealed homes, double pane low E windows, R49 attics. Most of the homes we're dealing with don't have that either. But when it comes to new construction, I'm really gonna be honest, as a contractor, I don't even know if I should say this, it really needs to be law changes and enforcement of said codes. Like push us to do better.
I want to add that I think this is the middleman that I'm talking about in terms of how do you translate policies and consumer choices, and in the middle stands the contractors and the home builders. And the unfortunate thing is that I think in this case, consumers call the shot. And then I guess, we need to understand what are their considerations. I want to actually build something or buy something that would really benefit me with the lowest cost possible. And the thing is, it's hard to, especially when it comes to energy tech adoptions, something that is not visible, something that actually does not enhance your resale value, something that doesn't. So we need a different kind of incentives to get people to do things. And I think the contractors would just give the customers what they want. There is no incentive for them to do that unless the customers are willing to pay for it. So this is kind of where we are caught. And I think sometimes we can make the economic argument, but a lot of the times we may not be able to. So the question is, how do we actually make that kind of selling proposition? And I also have heard from in this case, it's about I think, water softener. And I think there have been times, from what I've been told, is that even though the customers asked for it, they wanted to be environmentally sustainable. The contractors did not want to install it because they are afraid that this thing is not going to perform as well as what they would expect to. So even though the customers ask for it, and they may not get what they want because they don't know any better. So I guess there is this gap in information and understanding. And I think a lot of what we need to focus on is how do we bridge that gap. And I think this is where the challenge lies.
All right. All right. We're at the time where I think we'll have one more question. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so I've got one. Maybe to try to again circling back to sort of consumers and helping consumers maybe sort of navigate what they should be thinking about. I heard from I think pretty much every single one of you talking about the idea of thinking about clean energy tech adoptions and what they might want, changes they might want to make ahead of time, particularly in situations where they are some of those big one-time actions like Nancy was talking about that do come with a large price tag, that you want to have thought about that before the furnace blows up or your range dies, and then you're stuck with, I have to just buy the thing that the contractor has in the warehouse or the store has in the back. So how can we encourage more people to include clean technology in their thinking, in their savings plans, especially when, particularly these days, there are so many other priorities that people are trying to manage in terms of their finances and their priorities?
Well, I think it's really important to highlight how much money it could save them if they put in a little bit of that extra work, or at least know who to reach out to when the time comes to get up-to-date information and advice on what next to do. I really hope people have what Adam and I call our sort of house fund of that pot of, oh darn, something happened money that we keep set aside for those kinds of emergent issues. It might not be totally enough to, I don't know, replace the roof or something, but it's enough to get us started. But getting the word out that having that little extra ounce of prevention is worth not just a pound of cure, but like a sack full of money of cure.
Anyone else? How to get people to think about, if they're like, I'll throw in real quickly the example that I had. We had needed a truck for our family, and it just so happened at the time that we were thinking about buying one, Ford announced the F-150 Lightning, and it all kind of worked out where I was like, yeah, I'm going to buy that instead of the thing that gets, 15 miles to the gallon. And me being a data nerd, I had already kind of thought about EVs versus internal combustion engines. But for folks that maybe aren't thinking about clean energy tech right now, like what's something that can maybe kind of grab that imagination? Nancy, Kathy, Kevin, anyone?
Yeah, I think part of the answer here is social proof. So for people who haven't thought about EVs, I think about we have an EV, and my husband is an EV evangelist. So if you meet him somewhere, it is very likely he will start talking to you about how much fun EVs are, and he might well have you test drive our EV before you leave that discussion with him. Literally, like anywhere this could happen. It could happen in a restaurant. But he's giving people this chance to like experience this other thing and see what's cool about it and ask questions. And so much of, Nancy has talked about these middle people who are often the ones selling us things. And we also need people who we know and trust to say, wow, we got this thing and it was really great. So that when our friends go, oh, our water heater is acting up, it might be going out soon, we should ask our friend Corey about his water heater because he mentioned that he's super happy. And so it's that social proof we can create that is a deliberate thing we all need to do. If we care about these choices, we should be talking about the choices we're making in a transparent way that helps other people make choices.
I'm actually thinking, Kevin, do you work with these, I think, model homes developer?
No,
Is there?
I almost exclusively work with existing homes, but I couldn't agree with Kathy more. That's why we have signs and t-shirts that just say proud green homeowner. Like we want people to own that sort of sense that they're not just adding insulation. They're the kind of person that would try to make their home more energy efficient and evangelize about it. And whether it's yard signs, t-shirts, stickers, we're trying to get people bought into that idea because you can't do it as just one little company. You got to kind of build this momentum. But I'll quickly add, I do think that the existing homes are kind of our biggest worst. I mean, Milwaukee is still dealing with terrible lead paint issues that haven't been added since what, 1978? And so we're still dealing with the ramifications. We still have to do the same thing for energy in these older homes, although bless the weatherization program for 40 years plus of doing that. As far as how to motivate them, all of these are great ideas that came up today. I really love Focus on Energy had put a big effort, especially in heating, on trying to gather people at the point of sale, like when they have to replace their furnace. How do you get them to pick a more energy efficient furnace? And I think if we can find more examples of that point of sale to make that green decision, and one example I'll point to is green mortgages. There are, by our estimates, about 35,000 people in Wisconsin who bought a house with a conventional mortgage last year. And all of them, in theory, had the access to something called a green mortgage through Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, where the bank or credit union could have rolled in the cost of making the home more energy efficient at that point of sale. When a lot of times, especially with my house that used the green mortgage, I was in over my head with all that was happening. But to have someone kind of navigate you through it at that point of sale to say you're not just buying a house, but you're making that next house yours and green and energy efficient, whether it's windows or solar or heating systems. And so just to quickly go back to a previous point, one of the things that Focus, I really hope that they do soon, and I know it may not even be up to them, is today you cannot get the home's rebate without 12 months of energy bills. So that means that people buying a house, whether they use a green mortgage or not, cannot use the home's rebate. That is going to be changing, but we don't know when. And so at this moment, I can't help people buying a house doing it, and hopefully we can someday.
All right, we're at time unless Scott gives me the go ahead to give everyone kind of a speed round, one last short parting thought. Hearing nothing. All right. We'll just go in reverse order from how we went in the beginning. Real quick, one last parting thought. Quickly from everyone. So we'll start with Julie.
Yeah, sure. Make it pretty, make it beautiful. Things that are beautiful are built to last, and people want to keep them and maintain them. So don't just, I know we all often think about the bottom line, but make it fun, make it pretty.
All right. Thanks. Kevin?
Right now, you can be rewarded for fighting climate change. Let's go do it.
All right. Kathy?
Yeah, I was going to say largely the same thing. Just do it. Let's just start somewhere and do something.
Okay. And Nancy, you get the last one. Last word.
Make it easy. Make it easy and help consumers understand it and demonstrate it, what it feels like to be energy efficient. That's why I was hoping for a model home to illustrate these smart technology and get people to just give them tours, let them try it out. And until they experience it firsthand, it's very hard to grasp those concepts. So make it easy.
All right. Thank you, everyone. That was a lovely discussion. Hopefully everyone found that interesting and informative, and I will hand it back to Lulu.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for this panel. I would just like to share my screen quick. We have a QR code for some feedback. If you have a moment to fill that out, that would be awesome. I'll just share my screen. Here's the QR code. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.